Just this topic, the mastery of language, is enough to fill a library. I ask, who on the liberal conservative side has studied all this? Nobody except one guy, yours truly. Right? Now pay attention. Nobody here is talking about politics. Before you talk about politics, you have to create a new language. Right? That allows people to perceive what they weren't perceiving before. For example, when you oppose, something the dominant party did, and you appeal to the terms democracy, human rights, etc., you're falling into the same language. Because once you say human rights, it already has all the connotation they want, right? Just to give an example, if I say, social inequality, diversity, discrimination, etc. Well, of course you can try to oppose them saying, no, you are the discriminators, you are the racists, you are, throwing the same language back at them. This is a childish tactic because you are reinforcing their hegemony at that very moment. Even to attack you, I have to submit to the terms that you created and that you imposed. And everyone fell for it. So at this point, if the psychological, cultural, and linguistic situation is this, political discussion is useless, especially if this political discussion centers on certain practical economic issues, without touching on the question of hegemony. For example, I participated many times in the Liberty Forum. The Liberty Forum was a meeting held annually in Porto Alegre, and where they brought together liberals and conservatives every year. It was a monumental thing, like it gathered 2,000-3,000 people, right? But in the rest of the country, not a single line was written about it. So it was the only debate center that really existed where you could confront ideas. In the rest of the country, there was no confrontation. You only had internal debate on the left, right? So the Liberty Forum was truly an island of freedom, except it was a strictly local phenomenon, in Rio Grande do Sul. And besides, 90% of what was done there was like propaganda for liberal ideas, propaganda for liberal economics. Look here, socialist economics doesn't work, capitalist economics is far superior, blah, 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 which is something that it's true, without a doubt, right? You just have to examine the famous Index of Economic Freedom annually from the Heritage Foundation. And you see that, in fact, where you have more economic freedom, you have a better standard of living, you have society works, there's more well-being. This is something that doesn't even need to be discussed. It's 100% correct. Except, how can you, by means of an economic argument, oppose a total hegemony that penetrates inside the subconscious of people, that guides their family life, their sex life, their friendships, etc., etc. I say, oh, wait a minute. This is the same as trying to wound an elephant with a sewing needle, a crochet needle, right? So noting on one hand the good intentions of those people at the Liberty Forum, and on the other hand their total impotence in the grand scheme of things. You see that even the books from the Liberal Institute, there were magnificent books. There was Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, translated by my late friend Donald Stewart. It was the best Brazilian translation I've read in my life. The man was an engineer. He wasn't a professional translator. The translation is magnificent. And the book is extremely important. Those books didn't even appear in bookstores. You had to go to the Liberal Institute to buy them. So these liberal folks are completely isolated and impotent. And I found that deplorable and said, well, then their book is extremely important. Those books didn't even appear in bookstores. You had to go to the Liberal Institute to buy them. So the strategy is wrong because they're in a clash of economist debates at the end of the day, right? Not to mention that this liberal material sometimes came infected with certain doctrines that help the hegemony. If you take, for example, the doctrine of Ayn Rand, the virtue of selfishness, right? Because you have on one side an immense faction that dominates all communication channels, talking about altruism, equality, charity, etc., etc. Don't forget that charity campaigns were already hijacked and usurped by these people back in the 80s. through Betinho, right? Who even, look, Veja magazine went so far as to propose the beatification of Betinho. Look at the point we've reached. And it seemed normal. I mean, Betinho really seemed like Mother Teresa of Calcutta. In fact, he was just a communist strategist who said, so everything I'm doing is to reach the nationalization of the means of production, socialization of the means of production. He said that. Except that didn't make it to the mainstream media. Only the, how do you say, the kind and romantic side of it appeared, the quixotic side of it. So, I mean, one side monopolizes good feelings and the other comes with the theory of selfishness. Which, then you're proving what they're saying. I mean, you're wearing the t-shirt, right? You guys are trying to do good to your neighbor, but I just want to make money, because by making money, I'm already doing good without even thinking about it. I look after my own interests, automatically create wealth, and you benefit. Yes. There was also, let's say, on the part of Roberto Campos, right? That famous argument that anyone who is not a communist at 20 has no heart, and anyone who remains a communist at 50 has no brain. You are giving, let's say, communists a monopoly on good feelings. I mean, if you have good feelings, you have to be a communist. Later you mature, you see that these good feelings are nonsense, that the thing is to be realistic, to do the math, etc., etc., etc. You are reinforcing the hegemony. You are saying you have the monopoly, you have the right to have the monopoly on good feelings, and we here are just, hard-hearted old men who know how to do the math and know how to solve problems in practice. And so everything that was said, every time someone opened their mouth against the hegemony, it ended up reinforcing it. Why? It was, let's say, language. It has its own power. You can't imagine the depth of the linguistic studies that Antonio Gramsci did and that the Gramscian crowd undertakes to this day. Just this topic, the mastery of language, is enough to fill a library. I ask, who on the liberal conservative side has studied all this? Nobody except one guy, yours truly, right? So, you see, one side has already plotted the entire mastery of language to force people to be socialists without knowing it. I mean, they support everything that comes from socialism, but they don't call it socialism. And on the other side, there's some guy who stands up with an economic theory saying his is more efficient in the face of an absolutely cruel impotence, right? So I realized, I said, look, first thing, we have to break the linguistic framework, right? So it's not a matter of you arguing against the guys, because if you argue and you use the same language as them, you've reinforced them anyway, in any case. So the approach has to change. That's why I wrote The Collective Imbecile. So the collective imbecile, first of all, showed I'm not interested in debating with anyone. I'm just describing the madness of these guys, right? And secondly, it's not a respectful debate. It's totally disrespectful. I don't respect these people in any way, right? I'm not mad at them either. I'm here showing that they are clowns in the end. I mean, showing these characters in another light, right? But also in another language. This language, it didn't appear overnight. That was a style that I worked on for a long time to get there, right? And to make it in such a way that my sentences could never be used in the opposite sense. And they couldn't be debated, right? Without the individual unmasking themselves at that very moment. Because let's say the construction of the sentence already anticipated the reaction. All of this was very well thought out and it worked. Why? If you look at the publishing movement at the time, you simply didn't have books against the hegemonic system. There was nothing, 0, 0, 0, 0. You had at most 2 or 3 people who were a bit disillusioned PT members who said, no, they didn't realize the ideals of socialism. The SDF is to blame. This at most was that. I mean, it was internal debate on the left. So the point wasn't for you to turn against leftism, but against the hegemonic system, which also implied stepping on the toes of its opponents who were mentally enslaved, right? And the language for that, it had to, on one hand, be very precise. It had to account for complexities, subtleties of Marxist doctrine and strategy, right? And on the other hand, it had to escape academic debate. If I were to do another academic debate with them, they would just be honored saying, I'm not debating with academics who think differently from me. I'm debating with crooks. They are all intellectual crooks. Emir Sader, Marilena Shawi, all those people, right? It was, all of that was pretense, right? Why was it pretense? Because of this, I'll tell you. Well, he says the following, that in the hegemonic system, all human actions come to have two meanings. One, the subjective, what the individual thinks they are doing, and the other, the objective, which is how that fits into the hegemonic system, which they are not even aware of, right? So anything could be seen on both levels, right?